1. Enhanced physical performance, muscle growth, and endurance. Genetic modifications can potentially lead to improvements in muscle strength, endurance, and recovery. Athletes could experience faster healing after injuries, increased muscle mass, and improved cardiovascular health, allowing them to perform at higher levels for longer periods. Faster recovery. Modifying genes associated with healing could result in faster recovery times, enabling athletes to bounce back from injuries more quickly and train harder without the usual risks of overtraining. 2. Improved injury resistance. Stronger tendons and ligaments. Genetic modifications could potentially make tendons, ligaments, and bones more resilient to stress and impact, reducing the likelihood of injuries. Prevention of chronic conditions. Athletes in high-impact sports could benefit from modifications that reduce the risk of conditions like osteoarthritis, which can be exacerbated by repetitive movements or trauma. 3. Customized athletic abilities. Tailored enhancements. Athletes could undergo genetic modifications to enhance specific traits required for their sport, such as faster reflexes for a tennis player, superior endurance for a marathon runner, or greater flexibility for a gymnast. Optimizing genetic potential. By editing specific genes, athletes may be able to unlock their full genetic potential, which could lead to extraordinary feats of performance, possibly surpassing the current physical limits seen in natural human athletes. 4. Longevity in career. Extended athletic career. Genetic modifications could potentially delay the natural decline in athletic performance, enabling athletes to compete at a high level for longer, pushing the boundaries of sports longevity. Enhanced recovery from wear and tear. With modifications to genes responsible for tissue repair and regeneration, athletes may be able to endure the physical toll of their sport without succumbing to early retirement due to chronic injury. 5. Reduction in performance-enhancing drug use. Alternative to doping. GM sports could offer a way to enhance performance genetically rather than relying on banned substances like steroids or blood doping. This could be viewed as a more ethical alternative, though it raises its own concerns regarding fairness and safety. 6. Potential to create new sport categories. Emergence of new forms of competition. As genetic modifications take sports performance to new heights, it could lead to the creation of entirely new categories of competition, where genetically enhanced athletes compete against each other. This might evolve as a separate realm from traditional, natural sports. 7. Precision in training and development. Genetic profiling for personalized training. Genetic modifications could be accompanied by improved genetic profiling that helps tailor training programs to the specific needs of an athlete. This could lead to more effective, individualized development plans based on one's genetic makeup. 8. Ethical and societal considerations. Leveling the playing field. If genetic modification becomes widespread and accessible, it could potentially create a level playing field where athletes no longer need to rely on traditional performance enhancers, reducing the pressure to resort to unethical or illegal methods. While these advantages sound promising, the implementation of GM in sports raises many concerns, such as fairness, the potential for a genetic arms race, and the ethics of altering the human genome for competitive advantage. It also prompts questions about the true nature of sport and whether performance-enhancing genetics might undermine the spirit of human achievement. The ethical implications of genetically modified GM athletes in sports are vast and complex. While the advantages of GM sports could push the boundaries of human performance, there are serious concerns about fairness, integrity, and the very nature of athletic competition. Here are the main ethical considerations. 1. Fairness and equity. Access to technology. One of the central concerns is whether genetically modifying athletes will create a divide between the wealthy and the less fortunate. Access to genetic modification technology could be restricted to those who can afford it, leading to an inequality where only the privileged have the opportunity to enhance their athletic abilities. Genetic discrimination. As genetic modification becomes more advanced, there's a risk that athletes who have not undergone genetic enhancements may be seen as inferior. This could create an environment where natural-born athletes are discriminated against, potentially leading to a new form of genetic elitism. 2. Integrity of competition. Authenticity of athletic achievement. The primary ethical question is whether genetically enhanced sports would still be considered natural competitions. If athletes are artificially enhanced through genetic modifications, some argue that it undermines the very essence of sport, which is to showcase human talent, hard work, and perseverance. Pressure to enhance. If genetic modifications become the norm, athletes might feel pressured to undergo genetic alterations just to remain competitive, even if they don't desire such enhancements. This could erode the concept of voluntary participation and shift the focus from natural ability to genetic manipulation. 3. Health and safety risks. Long-term health effects. The long-term health consequences of genetic modification are largely unknown. There is a risk that certain genetic alterations may have unintended side effects or cause harm to an athlete's health over time, either during their career or later in life. The full impact on the human genome and its subsequent generations may not be understood for many years. Unregulated use. If genetic modification technology becomes widely accessible, there may be concerns about unregulated or unsafe practices, especially if athletes or organizations rush to adopt modifications without adequate scientific oversight or ethical guidance. This could lead to unsafe experimentation with human genetics. 4. The spirit of sport. Human versus machine. Traditional sports have been about pushing the limits of the human body and mind, testing the natural capabilities of athletes through training, determination, and discipline. The introduction of genetic enhancements could blur the lines between human achievement and technological intervention, leading some to argue that the competition might resemble a battle of machines rather than a contest of human skill. Loss of human element. If sports become dominated by genetically enhanced athletes, some argue that the human element, the struggle, the journey, the underdog victories, would be lost. The idea that an athlete's success is purely a result of their natural hard work, grit, and perseverance could be overshadowed by the artificial enhancement of abilities. 5. Ethical boundaries in genetic manipulation. Gene editing in children. If GM technology is applied to children or embryos to enhance their athletic potential, this raises serious ethical concerns. Parents might choose genetic alterations for their unborn children to give them an advantage in sports, which could be seen as a form of designer babies driven by external pressures and societal expectations, rather than the child's inherent desires or rights. Genetic diversity. Another ethical issue is the potential loss of genetic diversity in the human population. If sports push the ideal of genetic modification to enhance specific traits, strength, speed, endurance, it may lead to a narrowing of the gene pool, reducing the diversity of human capabilities in general. 6. Potential for exploitation. Commercialization of athletes. There is a risk that sports organizations or sponsors might exploit genetic modifications for financial gain, pressuring athletes to undergo genetic alterations for the benefit of the brand or sport. This could lead to a situation where athletes become products rather than individuals with rights and autonomy. Loss of free will. Athletes who feel coerced or pressured into genetic enhancement might lose their sense of agency in the sport, as their bodies become tools designed for performance rather than expressions of individual talent and passion. 7. Regulatory and legal challenges. Lack of regulation. The introduction of GM sports could outpace the development of ethical guidelines and regulations. Governments and sports organizations may struggle to keep up with the rapidly advancing science of genetic modification, leaving room for unethical practices and creating a legal gray area. Legal battles over fairness. If genetic enhancement becomes widespread, there could be an increase in legal challenges related to fairness in sports, with athletes and teams disputing whether certain modifications are allowed or should be considered illegal. 8. Moral dilemmas about perfection, redefining human limits. While enhancing athletes genetically could push physical performance to new levels, it raises moral questions about the pursuit of perfection. What does it mean to be human if our bodies can be engineered for optimal performance? Where do we draw the line between self-improvement and altering our fundamental nature as human beings? Identity and self-worth. Athletes may begin to question their self-worth and identity if their success is rooted in artificial enhancements rather than natural talent and effort. This could lead to existential struggles as athletes grapple with whether they truly earned their success or if it was a result of genetic manipulation. Delving deeper into potential solutions for managing genetically modified (GM) sports ethically involves addressing the ethical concerns raised earlier while ensuring that both athletes and the sport itself remain protected. Here are several potential solutions and frameworks that could be implemented. 1. Comprehensive regulation and governance. International regulatory bodies. One key solution is the establishment of global regulatory bodies specifically for genetic enhancements in sports, similar to how the World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, governs performance-enhancing drugs. These organizations could set clear guidelines on the permissible extent of genetic modifications, monitor their application, and ensure athlete safety. Ethical standards. These regulatory bodies could work with bioethicists, scientists, and stakeholders from various disciplines to create a comprehensive ethical framework for genetic modifications. This framework could include guidelines for determining which genetic alterations are acceptable, if any, and establish procedures to ensure athletes are fully informed and consenting. Uniform rules across sports. Different sports have different physical requirements, and genetic enhancements could be highly specialized. A unified regulatory framework could provide standards across various sports while also allowing for sport-specific regulations, ensuring that modifications do not give athletes an unfair advantage. 2. Focus on health and safety. Mandatory medical oversight. Before and after genetic modifications, athletes could undergo rigorous health screenings and assessments by independent medical professionals. This would help ensure that the genetic changes are safe and do not pose long-term health risks. Any modification should be tested thoroughly to ensure that there are no unintended side effects. Transparency in data sharing. To safeguard athlete health and performance, transparent reporting of all genetic enhancements and their effects could be required. This would include long-term data tracking, making sure that athletes' genetic modifications are continually evaluated for safety, and allowing for modifications to be revisited or revoked if adverse effects are discovered. 3. Ensuring fairness and equity. Access to technology. To prevent a divide between wealthy and disadvantaged athletes, governments or sports organizations could fund research to make genetic modification technologies more accessible and affordable to athletes at all levels. This could help prevent a situation where only the wealthy have access to performance-enhancing genetics. Subsidies or grants for underserved athletes. Governments, nonprofit organizations, or sports leagues could create programs to fund genetic enhancements for athletes who cannot afford them. This could help level the playing field and ensure that athletes from all socioeconomic backgrounds have the opportunity to enhance their genetic potential. Equal opportunities for enhancement. If genetic modifications become normalized, sports organizations might ensure that all athletes have access to the same opportunities to enhance their genetic abilities. For example, they could offer a genetic enhancement baseline where all athletes are given the same opportunities for enhancement, which might be supervised to prevent abuses or excessive enhancement. 4. Preserving the integrity of sport. Segregation of genetic and non-genetic athletes. One solution could be the creation of separate categories or leagues for genetically modified athletes and non-modified athletes. This would ensure that the integrity of traditional sports remains intact, while also allowing for the potential benefits of genetic enhancements. Athletes could choose whether to compete in a modified league or remain in a natural league. Clear definitions and boundaries. Defining what constitutes an enhanced athlete and creating clear distinctions between different types of performance enhancements, e.g., genetic, technological, or traditional training, will be crucial to preserving the authenticity of sports. If genetic modification becomes widespread, it would be important to make sure that there is no ambiguity or confusion about what athletes are allowed to do. Transparency in modification processes. Athletes could be required to disclose any genetic enhancements to sports authorities and their competitors. This transparency would help create a system of accountability and ensure that any modifications are openly monitored and assessed. 5. Public education and awareness. Ethics education for athletes. Providing athletes with access to education about the ethical, health, and social implications of genetic modifications could help them make informed decisions. This would be especially important if athletes are under pressure to undergo modifications to stay competitive. Educating athletes about their rights, potential health risks, and ethical considerations could empower them to make more ethical choices. Public dialogue and ethical discussions. A broader public conversation about GM sports could help shape societal views on genetic modification in athletics. Engaging the public, ethicists, and policymakers in ongoing discussions about what is fair, safe, and ethical in sports can help establish cultural norms and legal regulations that align with societal values. Informed consent. Athletes should be fully informed about the risks and benefits of genetic modifications, both in terms of their athletic performance and health. This involves ensuring that genetic enhancements are not administered without the athlete's understanding and consent, ensuring that they are making a fully voluntary decision. 6. Limiting or regulating genetic modifications. Moderation of enhancements. Rather than allowing unrestricted genetic modifications, sports bodies could regulate the types of genetic changes athletes can undergo, perhaps limiting enhancements to certain traits that do not give a superhuman advantage. For example, modifications that improve injury recovery or muscle resilience without significantly altering strength or speed could be considered more ethical. Monitoring performance gains. Sports organizations could track performance gains and improvements post-modification to ensure that the modifications are not giving an unfair advantage. Any significant and disproportionate gains could trigger a reevaluation of the athlete's modifications, ensuring that no one is pushing the limits too far. 7. Ethical frameworks for gene editing in youth. Age restrictions. Any form of gene editing could be restricted to adults who fully understand the consequences of their decisions. Implementing strict age limits and regulations would prevent gene editing from becoming a pressure-filled, routine practice for young athletes who may not be fully equipped to make such significant decisions about their bodies and futures. Parental rights and consent. If genetic modifications are considered for younger athletes, strict parental consent and counseling would be required. This would ensure that parents fully understand the long-term implications of genetic modification and are not influenced solely by societal pressures for their children to succeed in sports. 8. Maintaining focus on the human element. Emphasis on skill, talent, and hard work. One solution for preserving the human element of sport is to continue placing a strong emphasis on skill development, mental resilience, and hard work. Even in the age of genetic enhancements, the value of perseverance, discipline, and strategy should remain central to athletic achievement. Promotion of non-genetic achievements. Creating recognition and rewards for athletes who achieve extraordinary feats without genetic enhancement could help preserve the honor and value of human effort in sports. Let's dive deeper into how these solutions could be implemented in practice. Here's a breakdown of how each solution might be practically carried out in the realm of GM sports. 1. Comprehensive regulation and governance. Establishment of global regulatory bodies. Similar to the way the World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, regulates substances in sports, an international body could be set up for genetic modifications. This organization would set universal guidelines for what is permissible in genetic enhancement for athletes. Countries could adopt these guidelines into their own legal frameworks to ensure consistency across borders. They would also monitor and ensure that modifications are safe and beneficial to the athletes. Implementation example. A global genetic sports enhancement commission could be created composed of bioethicists, geneticists, athletes, sports organizations, and lawmakers. This body would regularly update rules based on advancements in science and would be responsible for monitoring research, ensuring compliance, and resolving disputes. National regulatory agencies. Countries could develop their own agencies to oversee GM sports in line with international standards. These agencies would be responsible for enforcing national laws, protecting athletes, and educating them on safe and ethical practices. 2. Focus on health and safety. Mandatory health screenings and medical oversight. Before undergoing genetic modifications, athletes would have to undergo thorough health evaluations to ensure they are physically and mentally prepared for the procedures. Afterward, regular checkups would be required to monitor the effects of the modifications on the athlete's health over time. Implementation example. A certified genetic medical board could be set up where doctors, genetic counselors, and bioethicists work together to evaluate an athlete's health before and after genetic enhancements. For instance, an athlete wanting to enhance endurance might need to have cardiovascular health evaluations, while someone considering muscle enhancements might be required to undergo tests on joint strength and bone health. Informed consent. Athletes will be provided with comprehensive details about the potential risks and benefits of genetic modifications. Consent forms would outline not just the athletic performance implications, but also the potential long-term health risks. Implementation example. Before an athlete undergoes any gene editing or modification, they could undergo a genetic counseling session, similar to what is done in other medical fields like IVF or organ donation, where they fully understand the science and implications behind the modification. 3. Ensuring fairness and equity. Access to technology. Governments or sports organizations could fund research grants and create subsidies to ensure that genetic modification technologies are not limited to the wealthy or elite athletes. This would prevent a genetic divide and ensure that athletes from all economic backgrounds have access to the same opportunities. Implementation example. A global fund could be established, similar to the Olympic Solidarity Fund, to provide grants for disadvantaged athletes from developing countries or lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Additionally, sports organizations could partner with genetic research companies to sponsor athletes for genetic enhancements. Standardized genetic modifications. To avoid creating an unfair competitive advantage for some athletes, regulations could limit the types of genetic enhancements available to all athletes. For example, modifications related to muscle recovery might be available, but modifications related to physical strength or endurance could be restricted. Implementation example. A regulatory body could approve a list of acceptable genetic enhancements that have been shown to improve health or recovery, but not provide a direct, performance-enhancing advantage, like gene therapy for injury recovery. 4. Preserving the integrity of sport. Separate competitions for enhanced athletes. One solution could be the creation of separate leagues or competitions for genetically enhanced athletes and non-enhanced athletes. This would allow athletes to choose whether they wish to undergo enhancements and compete in a modified league or remain in traditional sports. Implementation example. Similar to the concept of parasports for athletes with disabilities, a genetically enhanced league could be established, where athletes who opt for genetic enhancements can compete among themselves. This way, traditional sports could maintain the integrity of natural competition while also accommodating those who wish to undergo genetic modifications. Transparent reporting of enhancements. Athletes who undergo genetic enhancements would be required to disclose these modifications publicly. This transparency could ensure that there is no ambiguity about whether athletes are competing on a level playing field. Implementation example. At the start of a competition or event, athletes might be required to provide a genetic report verifying the types of modifications they've undergone. This could be verified by independent bodies to ensure that no performance-enhancing modifications are hidden. 5. Public education and awareness. Athlete education programs. Before genetic enhancements are allowed, athletes should be educated on the potential consequences and ethical considerations of genetic modifications. This could be implemented through sports organizations, teams, and educational institutions. Implementation example. All athletes in a league or competition could be required to attend mandatory education sessions on genetic modifications and their implications for health and ethics. These sessions could be led by medical professionals, bioethicists, and geneticists. Public awareness campaigns. Public campaigns could be launched to raise awareness about genetic modifications in sports, helping the general public understand both the potential benefits and risks of genetic enhancement in athletics. This could be similar to how anti-doping campaigns raise awareness of the dangers of performance-enhancing drugs. Implementation example. Sports federations, alongside educational institutions and media outlets, could partner to create documentaries, articles, and social media campaigns that address the ethical considerations and potential consequences of GM sports. This could foster an informed public debate on the issue. 6. Limiting or regulating genetic modifications. Standardized genetic baseline. Sports organizations could define what constitutes natural physical abilities and ensure that genetic modifications are limited to non-performance enhancing attributes. For instance, modifications could be allowed for injury prevention or accelerated recovery, but restricted in terms of increasing muscle mass or enhancing stamina. Implementation example. An international sports body could conduct research into what constitutes a baseline of human athletic performance. Any genetic enhancements that are deemed to exceed this baseline, e.g., making an athlete significantly stronger or faster, could be prohibited. Ongoing monitoring of modified athletes. Athletes who undergo genetic modifications should be monitored regularly to ensure that their performance doesn't escalate to an unfair level. If an athlete's enhancements are found to be giving them an unfair advantage, their modifications could be revised or revoked. Implementation example. Sports bodies could create a monitoring system similar to drug testing, where athletes are required to submit to performance reviews and health checks regularly. These checks could help detect whether genetic enhancements are disproportionately affecting an athlete's performance. 7. Ethical frameworks for gene editing in youth. Age restrictions for genetic enhancements. Similar to how certain medical treatments are restricted to adults, genetic enhancements could be restricted for children or young athletes. Only adult athletes who fully understand the implications of modifications would be allowed to undergo gene editing. Implementation example. A legal age restriction could be implemented where athletes under the age of 18 are not allowed to undergo genetic modifications. In addition, a panel of medical and ethical experts could review cases where gene editing might be considered for minors, ensuring that the decision is made in the best interest of the athlete. Parental consent. For athletes who are minors, parental consent would be required before any genetic modifications are allowed. Parents would have to sign off on the procedure and be educated about the risks and long-term effects on their child's health. Implementation example. A formal process for parental consent could be developed, where parents meet with genetic counselors and medical professionals to ensure they fully understand the potential impact of genetic modification on their child's future. Conclusion. These solutions, while ambitious, could pave the way for a responsible and ethical approach to genetically modified sports. The key to their success will be ensuring that they are implemented thoughtfully and with a clear focus on fairness, safety, and integrity. By developing comprehensive regulations, promoting transparency, educating athletes, and protecting the human element of sport, the potential of genetic enhancements in sports can be harnessed responsibly. Balancing the potential benefits of GM sports with ethical considerations is an incredibly complex challenge. Implementing fair regulations, ensuring athletes' health and safety, and preserving the integrity of sports will be vital in shaping a future where genetic modifications can be integrated responsibly. By prioritizing fairness, equity, transparency, and informed decision-making, it may be possible to create a framework that allows for innovation while also protecting the fundamental values of competition.